Okay, I'm hoping that you can see this.
Yep, we got a timeline.
Okay. I've got to get to the, and I hope you're seeing the big timeline, I hope. Also, just to review, if you know how to use the, there you go. Okay, there's Bob using the reaction button. And there's also a reaction button to raise your hand. So you can do that. You don't have to raise your hand, obviously, but some people are more comfortable raising their hand, and I've got my eyes on your picture. So if I don't notice, just interrupt. Okay, so Ramsey left off with Coronado. I want to go back a little bit because there's some interesting stuff, some tidbits. It's not going to be in depth like Ramsey, but I think there's some interesting stuff to check off. And so I'm going back to 1511. And not much has happened in Mexico at the time. But there's a very interesting shipwreck that takes place out on the high seas and washes ashore to the Yucatan. And why am I bringing it up? I'm bringing it up because it's going to give Cortez 8 years later a great advantage in his conquest of Mexico. So what could a shipwreck bring to Cortez? So it's the Valdivia, and it floats ashore on Cozumel. And the only ones that survive are the ones that are captured by the Mayans, who are in charge in the Yucatan at that point. And there's two. There's the priest, Geronimo Aguilar, and there is the soldier, Gonzalo Guerrero. And they're going to have very different evolution. Guerrero goes native. Aguilar resists. And Gonzalo makes it onto some of the statuary. He made an impact. He got married. They had a kid. And I saw this statue in Acumel when we were taking a family vacation, I think 35 years ago, maybe more. And that's curious, a statue, and it was labeled the first mestizo. And it was only later when I started talking about this stuff that I could do a deep dive and figure out what happened. So Gonzalo Guerrero stays. He's celebrated in Mexican culture as the father of the first mestizo. And what happens now with Cortez, how he comes into the picture 8 years later, he has left Santiago as an outlaw. He had provisioned his ships, but at the last minute, the governor said, "No, I'm calling it off." And he said, "Screw it, I'm going." So technically, legally, he's a caudillo or a warlord, a rogue. And so off he goes, and he lands by fortune near Cozumel, where Gonzalo and Aguilar are hanging out. And he presents himself to the Mayans. They are duly impressed, and they say, we have somebody you may know. And he didn't know him, but it was very fortuitous because Aguilar and Gonzalo had learned to speak Mayan. Now, Aguilar is going to stick with Cortez and say, I'm out of here. But Gonzalo stays. And he does not go with Cortez. Cortez starts hopping along the Yucatan. He's got Aguilar who can speak Mayan. And so he has a contact all along the way. But fortuitously, we got somebody new. Welcome. Fortuitously, along the way, he meets a captive that the Mayans had taken prisoner, a whole group of them. One of them happens to be Aztec, and she has learned to speak Mayan. So this opens the door. Cortez is very interested, and you're going to see a love relationship. She is Malinche, who goes down in Mexican history. And what happens now is you've got a chain of, it's like the telephone game. You've got Cortez speaking to Aguilar in Spanish. You have Aguilar speaking Mayan to Malinche, who is born Aztec, and Malinche can speak and pass on the message to the Aztecs, or people who know how to speak Aztec, which is the lingua franca, up around Veracruz. So off they go to Veracruz, which is the shortest distance from the sea to Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. And he arrives with 500 men and 12 horses. And famously, a lot of his men are getting restless, and they want to go home. So he at night he burns the ships. He's all in. He's after all an outlaw. So for him, it's come back with a great success or die. And as Ramsey has taught us, these Castilian men are bold. So he's there. Here's the Aztec Empire. They're there in Veracruz. They've come up from Mayaland. And he now sees that he can change his status, rebrand himself from a caudillo to a captain, and he declares that he's on a mission, and he's got the means to conquer Tenochtitlan, or Mexico City. Ramsey talked about that. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. We're working our way to California. I have that in mind, but we can't skip some of this stuff. Now, there's a famous statue of the second mestizo, if you will, after Gonzalo. And here it was, but they've got the same deal going on in Mexico that we do with statues. No more mestizo, removed. There are some who take offense with the idea of mixing with the Spanish and their Aztec purity. Anybody know who this is?
Quasimodo.
This is Diego Rivera's rendition of what Cortez really looked like. So now we'll move forward in time 8 years. Any comments about Cortez and the first mestizo and the language chain? Now we move forward to 1527, and we were tipped to this last week. Remember, Ramsey gave us that PBS link, and it was about Coronado, but there was also something about Cabeza de Vaca. And I got really interested in his story, and I think it's relevant for where we're going, and I'll explain why. But he winds, Cabeza de Vaca is the treasurer for Charles V's fleet as they're exploring Florida, and they get blown off course into the Gulf of Mexico, and they wind up in Galveston. So here they started off in Cuba. Cabeza de Vaca is the treasurer. They make a few stops, and boom, they get shipwrecked right here in good old Galveston. But look what Cabeza de Vaca does. He walks across the upper part of Mexico and then down to a place called Culhuacan, and reconnects with other Spaniards. But this takes him 8 years. And along the way, he has a lot of adventure. So why am I bringing this up? Why is the larger Southwest important in relationship to California? And what I learned is that there is a linguistic note, the Uto-Aztec language group. And it spreads all throughout the Southwest. This sort of tan, this is the one that's obviously in California, in San Diego, and that's going to be very relevant quite soon. The one Indian tribe that you have to master quite early is the Chumash. They are the first real culture to thrive in California, and they start on the Channel Islands, which makes sense when we heard the story about the immigrants from Siberia that worked their way down, and the Channel Islands are one of the first attractive places that folks say, let's stay here for a while. Jim Teisel knows that there were other places, and Jim is involved in digs up in Oregon, and he can maybe correct some of the things that I'm saying. But the Chumash are going to be the first group of Indians that the Spanish are going to encounter. And why? This is this Uto-Aztecan group, and it goes all the way up to the Shoshone, up in Idaho, and all the way down to El Salvador. 61 languages in the group, one of the largest group of native speakers. And as you can anticipate, most of the speakers are in Mexico. And this is, if you want to go to Wikipedia and do a deep dive, here's the whole classification, which obviously we're not going to do. So why am I bringing this up? We're inching our way to Cabrillo, who is going to be the first Spaniard that's going to set foot on modern American Southwest in California. And he comes aboard in San Diego, and there's a tribe there, and they showed great signs of fear. Why should they show great signs of fear? Because they've been talking to other Native Americans. They can communicate. And Cabrillo writes that these Indians, and he calls them Indians, and I'll talk about that in a second, that men like us were traveling about killing many Native Indians. And we learned a little bit about Coronado last time, and we know that he was not a great guy when he was disappointed. So the natives knew what was going on in the interior. What happened around the Grand Canyon and up in Colorado, they knew. I'm going to give you a resource, and the first thing he's going to offer is what is the correct way to use the term Indian. Now, this book just came out, so this is very timely for our quest in California history. But Farragut says the term Indian implies otherness, and that they're not like us. And he says that we should use the names that Indians use for themselves. Okay, so for me, I was in the Indian Health Service for 2 years, and the people that Iko and I got to know used the word Indian. They used a powwow, so they used Indian rodeo. And so in that respects, Navajo, be fine to call them Indian because they use that for themselves. Now, obviously, there's generational changes, and you have to be sensitive to that. But default, your safety name is Native. I remember it was interesting. There was this movie, Wind Talkers. It was about the Navajo code talkers in World War II that perplexed the Japanese totally. It wasn't a written language. There was no way the Japanese were gonna use it. Nicolas Cage was one of the stars, and we saw a panel with these code talkers and Nicolas Cage. And he used the word Indian, and he just groveled on the ground, apologizing profusely. And the Navajo code talkers just laughed and said, Navajos, that we call each other Indian. So current young generation Oklahoma, that might not work. But if you're sensitive, so that's the way I'm going to work around it, try to default to Native, but because I'm still in the Indian Health Service, I may slip up because we were used to being, Iko and I, around Native Americans who called themselves Indians. Okay, so Cabeza de Vaca. Let's continue on the rest of the voyage. This map's a little more simple. He lands in Galveston. 15 make it past the first winter, and then there were 4, and they were enslaved. And they eventually were able to extricate themselves. And what an interesting group it was that's going to proceed on foot. And one of them was an African slave. De Vaca was a very charismatic, capable guy, and so was the African slave. Esteban or Estevanico, and you'll be hearing more about him because he made a big impact in the American Southwest, being African. Cabeza de Vaca is in the same mold as the bold Castilians. His grandfather had been a fighter. But de Vaca, if you watch that Ken Burns short documentary, goes a different route. Last week I called him the good conquistador. He was able to change roles and see himself as a healer, and being able to share what he knew about scientific healing, which wasn't very much. And he later became an advocate, as you'll see. And this is in contrast to Coronado. Healer and missionary, this has been depicted. Obviously, all this is somebody's fantasy of what it must have been like. And he knew the people that he encountered by what they ate. So they were the roots people, the fish people, the blackberry people, the fig people. That was an easy way to deal with new people who maybe you couldn't understand, and maybe they didn't know how to address themselves. So he walks. And as he walks, because he's charismatic and because he is a healer, he assembles an entourage. And Estevanico will be able to do the same thing in the American Southwest. So De Vaca wrote about his experience. He talked about the advantages of making peace and being friendly. It was for initially very practical reasons, but and he left the whole country in peace, and he felt God was guiding us. So it shifted from being just survival to a spiritual mission as well. When he gets finally to Culhuacan, he's been walking all this way, and he sees what his fellow Spaniards have done with their victory in Mexico. He's grieved to see that the villages are pillaged, the natives enslaved, fertile land uncultivated, the natives hiding out in the forest. And he says it doesn't have to be this way. And he tries to intervene, but and he's assembled his own entourage. And what do the soldiers do? They attack the entourage that De Vaca has accumulated. So the Spanish mindset, I'm just going to quickly review what Ramsey taught us. You remember the mindset that after the fall of Rome, it was the Visigoths. and then it shifted a few hundred years later to the mentality of the Reconquista. How do we get these Muslims out of our territory? And all that time, it was a pretty rough place. We hear a lot about mercenaries these days, but you'll remember we learned from Edward Burke that El Cid was a mercenary. Really, he was a crusader, and we saw him galloping on the beach. So the nobility and the feudal nobility is nothing more than matured warlords. You can use the word nobility, but when does a warlord shift and become a noble, an aristocrat? And Castile's nobility that became the conquistadors. Then, given the background of the Visigoths and the Crusaders and Reconquista, they had a tradition of toughness, arrogance, and they were warriors. And Cortez and Pizarro were the poster boys, as Ramsey called them. And they were entrepreneurial to the limit, but they tried to work both sides of the street. They were entrepreneurial and kind of on their own volition, but they would work the channel with the king as much as they could. And so their victories came 1520 and 1532. So by the time Cabeza gets back, I think it's 1535, this just in, Pizarro has defeated the Incas. Then you get the mindset of all the religious wars in Europe that Ramsey talked about so much. And you get the Inquisition. That's not a good mindset for people coming in trying to establish relationships with new people. And we're going to see the French are different. So finally, as Ramsey taught us, Spain imposed a little secular order with the vice royalties, and they tried to tame the conquistadors, and they were successful. They were successful in the Charles V in gaining control. So de Vaca is coming into Mexico with all this as background, and he was finally able to find one of these new type of administrators, and who was trying to institute a new, more enlightened policy. And this is a word, maybe somebody who speaks Spanish can help me pronounce it. Alcalde, I guess, a Spanish captain, and we'll run into that term over and over again. De Vaca's idea was, we'll get the natives to convert, and they should put up a big wooden cross in each village to kind of protect themselves against rogue soldiers. And Cabeza de Vaca writes up his experience on walking through the Southwest and seeing what was happening in the Northwest of Spain, and he petitions the King of Spain. And as Ramsey talked about last time, we see that there is some change in the theology and the governance of Spain. And we get the debates between Las Casas and Sepulveda. We're going to get to the Pueblo Revolt, but that's a ways away. And they were able to give the church wins the argument that we're not here just to exploit. These are souls that must be treated as human. And as Ramsey said last week, this is thought to be the first international legal idea to be accepted. And Ramsey was impressed enough to take this picture at the U.S. Capitol, where he saw de las Casas. But Cabeza de Vaca is given full credit. This is a statue of him in Houston, not far from Galveston. And he came back, had that influence on the king, gave a boost to the church, the enlightened people in the church. Then Ramsey briefly talked about the different policies between the French and the Spanish and the English. And I was really interested in the French, and this is where I want Homer to weigh in when he's back from his knee replacement, and talk about the different approach. It's the same year or the same decade, 1530, but the French are in a different situation, to be fair. They're up in the north, and they're part of hunting and trading, not competing for land or agriculture. So that's a big difference. But they're going to have a very different relationship with the people. They intermarry, producing an equivalent to the mestizo, the metis. And now in Canada, you have a political movement called the First Nation. And they tended, as fellow hunters, to treat the natives as equals. And you do that when you're hunting together. And then ultimately they fought together. And we know that very well from our French and Indian wars. This is Ramsey's slide that just reviews the English policy and the French policy. English was more removal of Indians, not subjugation. I don't know what's better. They're both bad. But little intermarried, so the French were more tolerant. Now de Vaca lives on. This is one of his quotes. It's a double-edged message. It's a double-edged message, right? This becomes a rationale for the missions in California. And we can talk all day about the missions and the pluses and the minuses and the unintended consequences like disease. But this is his message. The Chicano community has embraced Cabeza de Vaca. He's considered a hero in Chicano literature. There's 5 periods I've learned. So Cabeza de Vaca is in the earliest, the Spanish American one. I guess right now we're in the annexation period, where the border moved in 1846, and then Renaissance and modern. There's the film version of Cabeza de Vaca, and he goes back to Spain and he writes a book, and he describes people that he met along the way who probably have died off, ironically, by the diseases that Cabeza may have carried into their areas. And he had a second act. He goes back to Spain and he publishes a book. This doesn't have anything to do with California, but it's just human interest I can't resist. He is reassigned to Paraguay to find a useful route from the east coast of Latin America to Peru, because Peru is where the action is. As Ramsey taught us, that's where the mines are, the silver mines of Potosi. And they're really interested in finding a nice route through to Peru. The settlers in Argentina didn't take well to his enlightened conduct towards natives. They wanted to use natives for labor, and nevertheless, his first main challenge when he gets to Asuncion, Paraguay, is to deal with a woman who has killed a colonist, her master, and she was a victim. She was handed over to the Spanish, and this is how outrageous it was. It was called Mohammed's Paradise, the sexual ethics in Paraguay. And it was the only way that the colonists there could make money, because there was no gold, there was no mineral wealth in Paraguay, and so entire villages were emptied, and we have a word for that now. It's called genocide. We're on the lookout for that happening in places. Sexual enslavement, moving the procreative forces across borders. And there is a movement called India Giuliani, and she is celebrated for poisoning her master with herbs. Her problem was that she boasted about it. So de Vaca ordered her execution, and she's become a martyr to women in Paraguay. And this is, by some, considered the first recorded indigenous uprising, this resistance that India Giuliana started. Unfortunately, de Vaca, even though he had to take care of Giuliana in an awful way, it wasn't enough, and the colonists got involved in a conspiracy against de Vaca, and they accused him of being too permissive. and he was sent back to Spain in chains, but he was later pardoned. There is a way across the Andes. De Vaca never found it, but there are ways to walk across the Andes. And Neruda, the poet Neruda, Chilean poet Neruda, took it when he was being persecuted. He had been Allende's ambassador. The Latin Americans have this wonderful tradition of appointing poets as their ambassadors, literary people as their ambassadors, which I find quite charming. So he gets back and he writes a second book about both the shipwreck and Paraguay and his experiences. There's another party, another person in that four-person surviving group. I've already mentioned Esteban. He was charismatic, as I've mentioned, as well. He was a Moroccan slave, and he walks with Cabeza de Vaca for 8 years, like Cabeza de Vaca, learning languages and cultures. And he's the one that comes back with all the rumors of great wealth. And whether that's from his own independent investigation or from his own vivid imagination, we don't know. But there is a phenomenon when obviously technically advanced invaders are coming through your territory. The strategy is always to say, oh, it's good here, but the next village is even better. And so they're constantly trying to sweep people forward. And we'll see, and we saw that a little bit already with Coronado, and we're certainly gonna see it with Cabrillo and Spanish explorers in California. Go on to the next village. It's really great. They've got a lot of gold there. So Esteban, the word showman has been used. He had this charisma. Obviously, he takes the same path as Cabeza de Vaca, but you see, he gets back to Mexico City, but he gets a second leg. This is the prequel to Coronado. If he comes back talking about cities of gold, and they're given the name Cibola, collectively, all these cities of gold that exist, the viceroy, the powers that be, said, okay, we're going to organize another trip up there for a closer look. You four people that just got back, why don't you head out again and go back up there, and we'll send you with more resources. But the other three decided they weren't going. They were free men. Esteban was not free. He was a slave, and so he was purchased and made an offer he couldn't refuse, and sets off with the cover of a Franciscan priest, Nisa. And they're on their way to the mythical cities of gold. And where are they? They're right here. Hawaku. And that's right on the state line between Arizona and New Mexico, quite near the Zuni reservation. and Hawaku was a Zuni pueblo. You can see modern today. There's a mixed Native American use here. Navajos over here, and we're going to see Hopis nearby as well. So where did these Pueblo people come from? This is interesting. We lived there for 2 years, and you couldn't help but be exposed to the cliff dwellers and the Anasazi. They're the pre-Pueblo people, ancient people of the rock, Anasazi. And this was the nearest and most spectacular ruin, about 50 miles from where we were stationed on the Navajo Hopi reservation, Batatican. And here we are in our youth. We went back with our youngest son, and it was quite different. They had this time a Navajo guide, and you could only go on a guided tour, and he organized this, and he took us around, and you can see the cliff dwellings in the background. And we asked him at one point, well, why did the Anasazi leave? This looked like a pretty sweet deal. And the main theory that we'd all heard was water, that there'd been a big drought and they couldn't survive anymore in the cliff dwellings. And this guy said, water, water, water. That's all I hear from you people. He said, why couldn't we have the same kind of motivation to immigrate like you did? We had a great prophet who came through and organized the Anasazi, the charismatic leader, and led them over to the Pueblos. That's what happened. Yeah. And you had Martin Luther. Why can't we have it? He was very defensive about that question. He was probably tired of getting it. Is that how you remember it, Aiko? Anyway, back to Esteban himself as he approaches Hawaku. He has resuscitated his previous charismatic showmanship and presented himself as the son of the sun. It worked. Again, he had a lot of natives joining his retinue because he was promising a lot. Just as when he learned to do as he walked across the Southwest. And so he gets to Hawaku and he says, I come in peace, see you soon. And they said, no, we don't want you. And to his detriment, Esteban ignored the warning. He went in thinking that his showmanship would carry the day. And quite simply, word of his death reached Niza. And he turned around and headed back to Mexico, claiming to have discovered the fabled golden cities of Cibola. And this is one of the rumors that went on to fuel Coronado in the following couple of years. And unfortunately, it kind of foreshadowed some of the violence that's going to take place. As with a lot of things, he's been reevaluated and is seen by some as a cultural broker, a champion of diversity, He lived in many places after Morocco, Spain, Cuba, and then finally Mexico, and died in American Southwest. When we were there, we saw some graffiti of a black man playing a flute, and somebody told us it was Esteban. I haven't been able to verify that, but he made an impression, and sadly, there are many Navajos who want to be reassured if they need a blood transfusion that it's not from an African American. Very, very sad. So that's one of the legacies. So this is Coco Pele, possibly drawn with the, I don't know if he was musical or not. So we're going to be ready to move on to Coronado. We started 5 minutes after. I'm going to pause here at least and open it up for discussion or questions, but I can forge ahead if there isn't any.
Well, John, the only one I would add is people may know, but Cabeza de Vaca translates as head of the cow.
Head of the cow, yeah.
Right. So I'm assuming you know that, but I don't know if everybody does. But it's an interesting name, right? That he's seen as the head of the cow, and that may have been his birth name, but I wonder if it was his kind of explorer name.
Well, if you look at the literal meaning of some of our surnames, cow's head, I know, not exactly, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one time when I was testifying to the EPA about air quality in the Central Valley, one of the field workers came in and was talking about the vaca, the caca de vaca. and the panel didn't understand. I had to translate that meant the shit of the cow, because they were talking about cow shit as being such an air pollutant. But,
Caca de vaca.
Caca de vaca. So Cabeza de Vaca is the head of the cow. Anyway, interesting story.
Well, that and for those of you who don't know, David's really into air quality from his years in Fresno, really. The Central Valley. His son has done some interesting mapping work in that, and some of his really good friends are still involved in that. And it's been a mission for David. His nom de guerre is the air doctor.
Well, my email account is my Gmail.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So move forward. So Coronado, this is Ramsey's nice little diagram. Coronado is going to be B, following in the footsteps of Estevanico. And here up he goes. Here Estevanico is referred to as the Turk. This is, I think, from the National Park Service handout. This is Ramsey's. And off he goes, heading up north. And he gets to the same city where Estevanico was murdered. And he takes no prisoners. He is ruthless in Hawaku, and a few other places. But like all explorers, he's told, no, this isn't too good here at Acoma. You want to the city of gold? Yeah, you just head northeast. You can't miss it. And off he goes. He's interested in finding water, and he first sends a scout off in the direction of the Colorado. He's heard about it, and he picks up some Hopi guides along the way, which is going to be part of my story. This is from the National Park Service brochure. And who is he? Born into a noble Castilian family. He was involved in sending Estevanico and Niza on. He was following them very closely. He gets there, and with all these supplies and all these men, and just there's modest pueblos, and he just takes over Hawaku, turns it into a winter camp, and the Hopi, I guess they're made an offer they can't refuse, but they certainly don't show them anything that would interfere with Hopi life at all. And they take them to the south rim of Grand Canyon. Sure, we can show you the Colorado. It's right down there. And that was not much use for him at all. And the thing I want to at least mention, and we'll return to it next week, is there is a way down into the Grand Canyon following the Little Colorado River Gorge. And this is one of those, don't throw me in the briar patch. The Hopis have gone down this pathway to the Colorado River in time immemorial, making what they called, first of all, the salt pilgrimage, but they get to the bottom, and they believe the Garden of Eden is there. There's a hole that comes out of the earth that they believe leads to the third world. And then below that's the second world and the first world. And this Vale of Tears where we live is the fourth world. And so the Hopi's guides said one thing we're not going to show them is how to get down into the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And that's where we'll start next week. The final slide is the Little Colorado. Pepper will be interested in this because this shows the drainage. And you'll be glad to know that we lived on Moenkopi Wash, Tuba City. And I went to your website and dropped a drop in Tuba City. And it flowed down the Moenkopi Wash, down the Little Colorado, and into the Grand Canyon. So, David, thank you for that resource. Okay. Any questions? All right.
Yeah, John, a question for you.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the Moenkopi Wash.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the derivation of the Moenkopi?
Hopi, and the Moenkopi Do you know anything about the mesas? So there's really four mesas. Three of them are labeled first, second, and third. But the mesa that was right next to Tuba City was called Moenkopi. That was the name of the city and the wash. Tuba is a bastardization of the word Tuva, which was the name of the Hopi chief who invited the Mormons in. Why? To help them fight the Navajos, who are constantly raiding their fields and raiding their livestock. So Tuva became Tuba.
Well, I was curious about the Moen is actually in Norwegian is just the first four letters there. Moen is a kind of a meadow in Norway. And so I was just curious as to, is that a combination of things, or it's a bastardization of some kind of a Pueblo name, I guess, or something?
Well, good question. If we find a connection between this and Norway, I'll be really amazed.
That's your last name too, huh?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So, yeah. No, that's. But it's a kind of a situation where it was just meadow, and back in Norwegian terms, it's kind of like the farm you were born on. So it was obviously we were born on my father or grandfather was born on a farm, and they called it the Moen Ranch or something. So anyway,
nice, interesting.
Yeah,
we're always looking for good, interesting connections.
That's for sure. No, the other one is there's an island off in where the Japanese fleet was sunk in the South Pacific. There's an island of Moen there, and
those Norwegians got around.
I guess they did. Yeah, Vikings.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Thank you all. See you next week.
Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
John.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks, John. Great
Thank you.
lecture.